Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we talk with people who are going to help our small and medium-sized nonprofits do good better. And I have a question that I probably know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway for our listening audiences. You just look around and you're like, what the hell is going on here in the world? I work at a nonprofit. I'm trying to do good. Everything is going cattywampus, and I don't know where to start to just try to find any sort of rooted decency so I can just continue the work I'm doing and not feel like I'm just throwing everything away. We all feel it, by the way. And I know that you're feeling stressed, and I know that everything is a little more heavy than it felt like it used to be. I got you covered today. With our guest, Colleen Doyle Bryant. She is an author. And I love this as a title of an actual sort of an expert, a common decency expert on the show today. We're going to talk about a whole host of things. Colleen, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm excited to talk about your book. I'm excited to talk about sort of some of these really kind of hard and heavy issues that I think a lot of nonprofits think about, but maybe they don't talk about because they don't know where to start in the conversation. So this is going to be a really, really fun chat today with you. But before we get started, because I want people to know about you, first is a 5,000-foot view, who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today.
All right. Well, as you mentioned, I'm an author. I've been writing books for about 10 years now, and I write about how to make good choices for the right reasons. So I started out writing books for kids and teens, and they're used in curriculums around the world to teach kids about being honest and respectful and being caring and why they would want to do those things. One of my main messages is that doing good feels good, and helping people connect with that, brings the reward in for making these good choices. But as you mentioned, we looked around a few years ago and said, for all that we adults seem to know we should teach our kids to be honest and respectful and kind, a lot of people aren't doing a very good job of that in the adult world. So my latest book, Rooted in Decency, started with a question, which is, why are people acting like this? This is so odd. This is so much more, aggressive and nasty than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. Why? And that research, where I looked across many fields, I looked at psychology, sociology, philosophy, biology, neuroscience, and I said, what is causing this and what can we do about it? I kept finding these wonderful aha moments where it's like, oh, you look at that and that together. And it's like, oh, finally, this makes sense. Now I see some reason and I see some path to change. Mm-hmm. And so that's what Rooted in Decency is about. It's where did common decency go? How is that affecting us personally? The way we talk, the way we think, the way we feel. And how do we get a path to something that's more cooperative and kind?
I love all of this, and I have so many questions. This is going to be super fun. I think from a perspective, when we are working at a nonprofit, we do this because the work feels good, right? We're going to make a positive impact on the world. And let's just say we're excited about talking or promoting or celebrating a win. We go to social media and we post it, and immediately a human being that does nothing but sits on the internet all day says something super mean and hurtful. And the immediate reaction, I think, to the nonprofit realm is, oh man, I've done something horrible, or I didn't consider this, or maybe this is my fault, I shouldn't have done this. And I think it prevents a lot of us from celebrating wins because we don't want any sort of blowback that we're trying to do, or it makes us pause and not authentically showcase what we're doing because we're overanalyzing what other people are going to say about us. And maybe let's start there. How do we just manage that anxiety that now exists? Like you just said, it just seems to be a lot more crazy now. But how do we manage that anxiety and the process by which we just want to showcase the awesome things we do, but I'm so worried about I'm going to get holy hell for all of this?
Yeah, that is a big question. And it's something we actually all are going to have to work on together, because this culture where people are using shame essentially as a weapon of social control, it's really gotten out of hand. And so there's this really interesting thing in sociology where the way we manage people's behavior is you have the government creates laws, and that tells us what we should or shouldn't do in certain respects. But then the people, we, through norms, control each other's behavior. And if you look at the way things are happening right now, you have this thing where some people, a few people with louder voices, will come and destroy your life with no trial, no evidence, no consensus. They just have this power to cut people down. Well, if the government did that, we'd call that tyranny. You know, we wouldn't be okay with that. So we've got this situation where we collectively are seeing that social control can go too far. It can be too aggressive. It can be too much power in the hands of a few people with a lot of things to say. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see a shift. You know, I pay a lot of attention to these articles because it's the thing that I do. There are so many more business owners, thought leaders starting to push back. You know, you're even seeing movements at universities where there are ways of rating schools on the extent to which people can speak freely without fear of being cut down. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a shift that's starting, and it is for all of us to get on board with that shift that said, hey, we need to get back to a place of being reasonable and being responsible with each other, because this destructive tearing people down thing is really not working for us.
How much easier is it to be mean? Is it getting easier to be mean and vindictive and caustic? And is it because there is, you know, back in my day, when you wanted to say something, you'd have to legitimately go to somebody's face and say, Colleen, I think you're a jerk and I don't like anything that you said. And that's very difficult to do if you really think about it, right? You have to actually muster up enough strength and enough audacity to be mad about something horrible enough to go into your face and do that. And then other people have to look at you while you're doing it. And so you're now playing to these social categories. And now it's as easy as click. It's one button as you can do it. Is it easier to do it now than it was in the past? And is that why people are finding it more often?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is yes, because it's a lot easier to be mean through electronic distance than it is to somebody's face. But there's a little more going on behind the scenes than that. Two things. First is that we've made being mean entertaining. So you look at things like reality TV, or one of the things I highlight in the book is Jimmy Kimmel has a skit where he has celebrities read mean tweets about themselves. And people are putting out these horrible, nasty things you would never say to somebody's face. And when the celebrity reads it, you have this moment watching there. It's like, oh, ouch. I mean, that was not nice. So the really cool thing in that is that human beings have evolved to have a care instinct. So what typically happens for people is when we see harm, when we see people treated badly, we don't like it. It doesn't feel good. And in fact, studies have shown if someone sees an employee, for instance, being treated badly in their job, a boss being disrespectful to them, for instance, they'll walk out and not want to do business with the entire company. So we know that we have this potential as human beings to care and to see harm and to not like it. But we've normalized seeing nastiness as entertainment. So one thing we can all do is not click and follow those sorts of things. Don't be entertained by people being mean. Don't comment. Don't cheer them on. You know, don't follow sites where people do that as their means of making a living. And
it's getting harder and harder to do because that's becoming more mainstream, and it's clickbait, right? So if I put out good vibes, it's way less clickable than, oh, I want to see this. And it's almost like I'm going to go click on this easier than anything else. And I think from a nonprofit experience, this is really beginning to show a compassion fatigue in a way in which a lot of organizations who are doing good are not getting acknowledged for it. And it's almost becoming in the void. We're so used to the vanity likes and the vanity clicks that allow you to almost online justify and encourage you to keep doing amazing things. It's a lot easier to be disparaging and get a lot of attention than it is to good. So you're almost think to yourself, and I've seen this happen with a lot of nonprofits, so they'll put forward we've got a great thing on mental health or mental awareness, and we're going to invite everybody to the public. It's free. We're going to invest time and energy into having an open dialogue, and 3 people show up. Or you can go to a rally and a lot of angry people and everybody will show up. And why am I putting a lot of effort into being positive when I'm not being reinforced by the general public? And it's a lot of throwing your hands up and going, maybe this isn't even worth my time trying to do that. How do we rationalize that when our whole world in the nonprofit world is to fill the void that the government isn't doing, because we know that that's the good and right thing to do?
That's a big question where you got to remember why you're doing it, right? What you're doing is important. It's necessary. And even more now, it's necessary to keep putting that goodness out there. I think one thing that's really interesting when you look at the history is this trend towards the negativity. This didn't happen yesterday. This has actually been a rolling progression for about 30 years now. And it started when people started using words that used to be considered dangerous. And they started using these words to talk about each other and to talk about issues. And so we've seen this slow progression where moral disgust and moral judgment have become the way that we communicate. Shame has become the way that we communicate, using extreme words about how terrible things are and how awful these people are. And, I'm right and you're wrong, and it's because of some moral failing on your part. That progression is where we're at today. And when that started around 30 years ago, the social scientists noticed that moderate people stepped out of the public sphere. They stopped participating because one of the theories is they didn't like the ugliness. They didn't like the fact that people were being so nasty or using these words that used to be considered dangerous, and you just don't talk to people like that. And they just stepped back and stopped participating. So it's not that there aren't people out there that want to hear what you have to say. It's that the conversation is being dominated by certain louder people who are caught up in the negativity. So really, we need you. Please keep doing what you're doing. Keep being positive, because we've got to draw people back out. And the only way they're going to do that is if they feel like there's a positive environment to step into.
When you're doing your research for your book and you're finding these things, and the silent majority is sitting behind and just waiting for the right time to go, all right, finally, I've just had enough, or I've snapped, and I have to bring back decency. Did you find what that threshold is? Did you find that this has gone on long enough and now they'll go and push? And then if you're a do-gooder, and if you are in that environment, and let's just say you're working with individuals who are easily shameable, right? So let's just talk about addicts, or you're talking about homelessness and things that are, these are all your fault and your things. And you're working with individuals like that. How do you create an environment for individuals who might be on the sideline to say, I would like to do this? Is it avoiding social media pieces? Is it going back to old school small group gatherings and building up rapport in that route? Did you notice any one thing that people were more drawn to than that would maybe attract those type of people to join your good crew?
Let's say one thing to start with is, when we're talking about shame, we need to look at how we're talking to each other, not even just the people that you're trying to help, but the people that you're communicating to and trying to win supporters, or trying to convince people of new policies, or talking to your board members. There are communication styles now that are so typical, we don't even realize that we're doing them, where the ways we're talking to the people we're trying to win over are actually alienating them. So the first thing to do, and we have a training we'll do on this later that people will be able to go find on your university, is that there are ways to be aware of these communication styles and to choose to communicate differently, so that you unite people, you attract them, and avoid some of these extreme ways that people are like, oh yeah, I just don't even want to be a part of that.
Yeah. A lot of what I think I've noticed, and I think a lot of our clients and people who just kind of stop by, is what's old is new again. In this active listening ability to just go, okay, let me start off with zero sort of preconceived notions, and I'm here, and we all focus on like the one thing rather than like, hey, there's a billion things that we're talking about or whatever, but hey, this is the one impact I want to make, or this is the one impact we want to work towards. And it's that common goal piece that I think a lot of nonprofits need to figure out internally, rather than trying to be a fix-all band-aid for everything. Is this is the one thing that we can all agree upon needs to have happen. And really getting niche-y into that department seems to be the thing that attracts, I think, the most loyal donors and supporters, et cetera. But it allows you then to almost ignore any excess noise of negativity, because, hey, if it doesn't have anything to do with this one little goal that we're trying to accomplish, all of a sudden that clarifies a lot of the conversation. And it's really an interesting exercise, I suppose, on getting your message really, really clear, I suppose.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that actually has to do a lot with brain chemistry.
Ooh.
Little did you know. Yeah.
I didn't. This
Yeah.
is fantastic. Stumbled upon brain waves. This is great.
Yeah. So the way people are motivated to do difficult things and to keep working towards things is not by setting some huge goal that's kind of ambiguous and is really far away. That doesn't get the brain chemicals firing to make us want to do stuff. In fact, there's this great quote from a neuroscientist where he says, it's something like, ambiguity is just annoying, you know? So when we have a clear long-term goal, we still need to break it down into small achievable goals, because the brain chemicals that fire, so dopamine is the thing that helps us anticipate we're going to achieve a goal and get a reward. That works when we have a goal that is clear and is within our grasp. And we reach that goal and we get a little reset. And then we say, okay, where's the next one? And that keeps this constant flow of the brain chemical that says, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep working because I want that reward.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about setting goals, first thing is don't make them so big. Don't be talking about like, oh my gosh, look at all this suffering. Isn't this terrible? I don't know that if we can ever really solve this problem. Ambiguity is annoying. People don't want it. Clear goals, little goals, keep resetting the dopamine.
We've mentioned it before. If you're really into food scarcity, you're not going to solve global hunger. You're not Bono. Yeah, even Bono's not Bono enough to solve it. But if you have a community, if you've got a neighborhood, if you've got families in that little area, you can solve it. You can go from zero to solved in a matter of a way shorter period of time. It's tangible, it's doable, it's executable. And it's such a wonderful reminder when we're talking to our board of directors, right? We're talking to, we're doing our strategic plannings and we're thinking about what we can accomplish. And that, again, it's a really wonderful reminder of that dopamine level that reminds you that, oh, you've got this thing in order. And it actually sets up the question I had next was, when we have the conversation about values at our organization, right? We have, hey, here's who we think we are. This is who we want to be. There's a lot of different personalities now that are running nonprofits, and there's the different generation for board members who think more corporately and like, hey, this should be the only value. There's a lot of younger generation who are applying and who are working in the nonprofit realms who are younger, like, well, my personal values are more important than your big corporate values. How do you make those work together? And it's one of the things that I think a lot of it, what we were talking about earlier, which is like this disconnect in communication between either generations or peoples or cultures or politics or whatever, is there's no commonality between those value systems. And you see it a lot of the nonprofit realms, especially when they don't understand why you're doing this or why can't you do it this way. Where's a starting point that we can have a conversation in leadership at the nonprofit level on the value of be personal or the sort of corporate, let's just call it?
Yeah. So there is an underlying set of values that is beneath people's personal values, beneath corporate values, beneath your religious values, belief, these things that drive you on your level for your culture, your generation. There's that level of stuff. But underneath that, across people, across time, across cultures, across generations, there are 4 core values that are the foundational building blocks for people, individual humans, to come together, form relationships based in trust and fairness so they can cooperate towards common goals. Yeah. 4 of them, boils down. You'd be amazed. So when we learn what those values really mean and how they really work, they give us a common language that can work across people. So quickly, what they are is truth, respect, responsibility, and compassion. And the way those show up over time or between generations and between cultures, the way they show up can change a little bit. But the underlying principle and understanding those underlying principles will give you a way to communicate what you believe in terms that other people will understand. So as an example, I think compassion today is kind of a big point of contention, particularly different generations or different views on the world. And some of that comes from a current interpretation of compassion, which is that we should solve all suffering. We should relieve people of whatever suffering they're experiencing. That's not actually what compassion is about. So compassion is about the human in me, seeing the human in you, seeing that vulnerability that we share, and saying, no matter who you are, no matter what choices you've made, I can see that you're hurting. Some part of me as a human being knows what it is to be in that vulnerable, frightening position. And I acknowledge that. Now, I would like to do something, but I need to think about what is the responsible and fair and reasonable thing to do. And so this is a huge point that I think for especially people in the do-good world to understand, is that people who aren't necessarily as deeply involved and deeply believing in your cause need some more of those justifications as to why is this the responsible, fair, and right way to approach this problem. Because we humans, we are big on fairness, we are big on accountability, we are big on the realities of resource management. So if you want me to solve this problem in this way, help me understand why it's the right approach, why it's fair to other people who might be impacted, why it's holding the people accountable who we're helping. If you can explain that, I think you'll get more universal understanding.
What I love most about that is that's a really good framework to tell a better story on impact as well. Right. We're always talking in the nonprofit world of like, how do you get people to rally to your cause, or how do you get people to be interested in it? Well, we always start with impact. Like, what are you actually going to be doing about it? But if you can frame it in a way that talks about, this truth and respect and responsibility, responsibility and this almost compassion area that you framed out. Well, if you can frame out your impact in that sort of way, all of a sudden may unlock some of those. Oh, yeah, I get exactly what you're doing, regardless of, wherever it's homelessness or it's, again, food scarcity or even developmental disabilities and delay. You understand that there's that commonality through your storytelling. If you use that framework, I think is a really wonderful way of thinking about that. That's awesome.
Yeah. If I can expand on that just for a sec, because you hear a lot of talk about empathy today. Oh, if you can just get people to empathize, then they'll feel it and they'll want to do something. It's not always the best tool, empathy. It's got a few shortcomings. So one is that empathy and compassion, they're both part of how we understand where people are coming from, how we connect with them, how we share in the joys in life, and how we help each other through the suffering. They're both important, but they serve a little bit different purposes. So when we talk about empathy, it's actually physically feeling what somebody else is feeling. And that can be a lot for people. It can be a lot to ask. So let's say you're talking to a potential supporter, a contentious issue, homelessness or drug abuse. And you say, feel their pain, look at their suffering. Don't you feel something with them? And there may be people who look at that and say, I really can't relate to that. I made choices in my life, so I don't have to feel like that. Why would I take on somebody else's emotions? If you're in the nonprofit world and you're constantly feeling emotions with someone, that can be pretty hard to take, right? It's not actually compassion fatigue, it's empathy fatigue. And then one of the other issues with empathy is that because you're feeling along with someone, you can get caught up in your own feelings and your own desire to relieve yourself of the pain. And so it becomes more about relieving the pain than solving the real problem. So one of these issues with messaging it may be hard to connect with people by asking them to do more than they physically can even get themselves to.
Mhm.
And it can make them feel like, are you solving the right problem?
Mhm.
Compassion, on the other hand, maintains that objectivity. It says you don't have to agree with the choices that that person has made, but you can see that they're hurting.
Mhm.
And as a human being with a care instinct, we don't like to see people hurting.
Mhm.
But now let's talk about what the right thing to do is. What's responsible? How do we hold people accountable, but at the same time, help them and consider the way the actions that we're taking impact other people in the community?
Such a wonderful reframe. And I think that actually relieves a lot of individuals who are in the nonprofit world of not having to shoulder that burden. And that's where you talk a lot about this burnout, where a lot of people just I can't cope with this amount of thing that I have to accomplish, and the few people that see it the way that we do or I will. So then if and I've used this term a lot too, and recently more often, if not us, who? A
Mhm.
lot of nonprofits will have to answer that question. A lot of donors might not buy into that because, well, I don't want to be the one who shoulders the responsibility financially or programmatically to making sure the world keeps turning. I'm not it's not Atlas sitting there going, oh, if I just stop, as everything goes apart. Where I think a lot of nonprofit leaders feel that way because they don't have another reframe for that. So that compassion and empathy reframe is wonderful. If you have those opposite section, how do you have that conversation within maybe your board leadership on maybe not, is there a starting conversation to have, or is there a framework that you begin to suggest, a board leadership and maybe a group of individuals who are purely empathetic and just over burnt out? Where do you come to those values to maybe start? You may want to rethink this as an organization because it's not working on as a one entity, I guess.
Yeah, I think today it is more important than ever for people to reset on what does it mean to be a decent human,
Mm.
right? So rooted in decency is about, well, why are we feeling the way we are right now? What's really happening? And then the last section of the book asks the question, well, so what does it mean to be decent in a world where some people think they're right and
Mhm.
other people look at them and say they're horribly wrong? Who decides? And we perhaps have in this negative environment lost a bit of perspective and common agreement on what does truth, respect, responsibility, and compassion mean. And that also it can be a little bit specific in a given environment, right? So we talked about people have personal values, people have or companies have corporate values. And so it would make sense to take those four. And if you look in the book, it explains what they are, and it gives you a way of understanding how we use those values to make decisions in real life.
Mhm.
And say, okay, what does this look like for our organization?
Mhm.
How do we draw the lines around respect and responsibility and compassion? What are our standards for the way that we deal with truth?
Mhm.
And make it really specific.
I love it. Get nichey. You can't be everything to everyone, and I love that. A lot of people could write a book. A lot of people could write books all the time, and a lot of people don't do it at all. And to move from sort of a children's perspective to this, like, oh man, everything's kind of crazy, and building into this more, can I say, adult themed
Mhm.
chaos with this particular book. Why a book? Why wouldn't this be a purely get on podcasts and kind of write it, or this would be maybe an essay thing? What was the thing that moved you to write it down and collect it as a total? Was it just something that was snapped one day, or was it that this is not written and we need to talk about it? How did that spark?
Well, as I was doing the research, I told you I kept finding these aha moments,
Mm.
and they were so fun to share. So, I'd talk to friends, or I'd be at a dinner party or whatever, and I'd bring up one of these aha moments, and the tone would change.
Mm.
People would get so interested and so excited and relate it to their lives. And I started accumulating enough of these aha moments that I thought, these really do seem to be interesting and helpful to people. I did not set out to write a book, by the way. I had written my other books. I was in my own little niche over there.
Mhm.
And the more I found these and the more I saw the way they affected people, I realized, okay, I need to compile these. And so the book is actually written intentionally that you don't have to be a big reader. Each chapter is kind of its own little standalone essay, pretty short, few pages long, with some journaling afterwards if you want to explore your own feelings. Or if it's your thing, read them straight through and it'll tell a story beginning to end. But the whole point is you don't have to make some huge commitment. You can kind of go in and see what sparks and see how that applies to your life and start doing some change.
What I love about that too, and I appreciate that, and thank you very much for that. As a story leading up to like how you built the story, is that I think a lot of nonprofit leaders find themselves in a place right now where they forgot why they're doing what they're doing, and because it gets so hard and because it gets so difficult, I always love to hear an origin story on why people did what they did. And I hope it encourages people who either listen to this or read the book to reflect back on why they've done and chosen the path in which they've gone to. It's almost like this wonderful self-reflection of like, oh yeah, I remember the first time that I got this little spark of an aha moment that I was going to change the world and I was going to do it through here. Or when I got the job, I knew I was going to do well. And you get caught up in a lot of the chaos and you get caught up in a lot of the insanity that is the nonprofit world. And if you can take a moment to reflect on, oh yeah, this is why I chose the path and this is why I continue to wake up in the morning, more power to you. Doesn't matter if you're an author or a business person or a nonprofit leader, you all have that little moment. And it's nice to go back and lend itself to just reminding how great it is. It would be remiss, however, if two things. Number one, we mentioned it on the top. She's going to stick around with us and we're going to do a training that can only be found at our Do Good University. So make sure that you get into the show notes there. But it would be horrifying if I didn't offer all of our listeners and those who are viewers on a way that can get your book, Rooted in Decency. Where do we find this? How do we go and get this book? And so we can buy it, not only one for us and then buy it for our board or everybody else that we want to buy it for too. But where do we go?
Well, if you go to my website, rootedindecency.com, then you'll find links to various shop sites, but it's available wherever books are sold. So you've got your Amazons and your Barnes and Nobles and your Indie Bounds, and it's there.
I love it. We're going to put links directly there. So after the podcast, please go and check that out. Go purchase one. Do stick around for those of you who are Do Good University members. We're going to talk about 3 approaches that alienate your supporters. Also, what to do instead. I think we get caught up in hey, this sounds like a good idea, but maybe it's not. We're going to talk about that there. Colleen's going to join us. It's great. By the way, if you are on the internet and you have not subscribed to this podcast, for shame. These are the type of amazing guests that we get on the show. So I would encourage you to do that and leave a review as well. And then immediately go back, make sure that you are checking out Colleen's website and getting her book. Colleen, for a couple of things. Number one, thanks for writing this. I think a lot of us think about this and don't know how to put it into words or don't have a reference point for how to manage these feelings of why are we the way we are doing and things we are. So thank you for writing that. Thank you too for sharing your perspectives and your general awesomeness today. This is a topic that I think is not shared enough or talked about enough. So on podcasts and that too, but mostly thank you so much for being a guest here on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you so much.